Hello, everyone, and welcome to Legalbytes. If you are new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. I am so excited to see so many people here already, and I'm super excited to bring on our guest, Will Chamberlain. Welcome.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Great to be here.
So before we get into it, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping here. So the chat today is subscribers only because I know recently we've been getting a lot of spam. And it's also on slow mode. So hopefully that will help the mods kind of keep things clean and bot free. If you guys, as you're watching, if you're enjoying this, be sure to like the video because it really does help us with those YouTube algorithm gods, gets the video pushed out and so that more people can see it. And if you are not already subscribed, if you're in the chat, you are subscribed. But if you're watching outside of the chat and you aren't subscribed, subscribing is probably a good idea if you want to see more stuff like this. Other than that, if you want to support the channel, there are a few ways that you can do it because pretty much every single live stream that we do on this channel almost instantly gets demonetized because of the subjects that we cover. So if you do want to support it, you want to see more stuff like this, locals, Patreon, YouTube memberships. We also have merch. All of the links are in the description below. So anyway, oh, and sorry, one last thing, super chats. Because Will is on a limited timeline, I definitely want to respect his time. For super chats, I might not get to everything while he's here. So I will try to get through everything at some point during the live stream. But if I get to it after he leaves and you're addressing a question to him, I'm really sorry about that. And I'm sorry if somehow I happen to miss something. With that, let's get into it.
Absolutely.
How are you, Will?
I'm good. About to head, back down to my wife's family's neighborhood for Thanksgiving, so I'm excited about that. But things are good.
Nice, really good. So I guess for people that aren't as familiar with you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a lawyer by training and the co-publisher of Human Events. I'm also senior counsel at the Internet Accountability Project, which is something that fights the abuses of big tech. But in I guess by since this is a legal channel, I should talk a little bit more about my legal background. I graduated from Georgetown Law in 2015. Practiced at Quinn Emanuel Urquhart & Sullivan in Los Angeles doing commercial litigation for about 6 months and decided big law was not for me. Didn't like it.
That's a common refrain that I hear. Yeah. I didn't go to big law myself, but from a lot of people that I do know that did go to big law, it's so rare to actually stay there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very the old joke that it's a pie eating contest and the first prize is more pie. I got that vibe. I looked at the partners that I was supposed to deify or admire their lives, and it's like, this is what you work hard to chase what these partners have. And I just saw a bunch of divorces, right? Very nice houses, but a bunch of divorces. And I'm like, seems like you might have missed like some sort of important calculation along the way.
Yeah.
So anyway, I later and then I practiced doing class action objection work for the Competitive Enterprise Institute under the guidance of Ted Frank, who's on Twitter, and he's a very good tweeter, by the way, if you don't follow him, at Ted Frank on Twitter.
All right.
But after that, left that to kind of like figure out what I was doing in the politics and social media world, since that was more interesting to me. Eventually ended up buying Human Events, hired Raheem Kassam to be editor-in-chief. He left pretty early on, which left me doing that. And now we brought on some new partners, but the big, I still have my, bar, even though I don't actively practice right now, I still have I'm licensed in California and DC.
Hey, like me.
Yeah. Oh, awesome.
I mean, I still do some practice, but right. But yeah, no, that's where my licensing is. I'm guessing it's partly because that's the one place that you can waive into from California without taking another bar exam.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like honestly, it was actually out of practicality. I mean, I took the California bar because I worked at Quinn Emanuel in Los Angeles, and I'm from California originally. Mm-hmm. And then when I moved back to DC, because I'd gone to law school here for another job, I was like, I can just waive into the DC bar and easily practice here without having to take a second bar exam. So that wouldn't have been true anywhere else in the country, because I think California is very stingy with its own recognition of reciprocity with other bars. So that's why that happened.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny. That's a similar experience for me. I moved to DC and found a job that was I moved to DC after I found a job in DC in an elder law firm, basically doing litigation and transactional work kind of combined. But yeah, it's an interesting experience going from one coast to the other? Because at least what I noticed anyway was definitely a very different style
Yes.
of lawyering.
I mean, Los Angeles itself already has a fairly casual style. And I mean, Quinn Emanuel is notorious, that firm, for being extremely casual. So, I could show up to the office in shorts and flip-flops and no one would blink an eye. If I was taking a deposition or something, or watching, going to a court, obviously that wasn't the case. But, for day to day, just hanging around the office doing legal work, they didn't care what you wore.
Yeah. That was one of the firms that I worked for, which actually was started up by a couple guys that used to work in big law. So it's interesting that it was the same sort of perspective. So on top of that, you're also senior counsel at the Internet Accountability Project, the Article 3 Project, and the Unsilenced Majority. So you're just like very bored, right? Like you have so much time on your plate.
Well, those are, they end up, to be fair, those are all sort of run by the same kind of group of people. And so, and my role ends up being kind of this volunteer advocacy role. So,
okay.
I kind of, dip in and out. I think I focus most on the IIP stuff because they're the most central to like my broader concerns over the last couple of years, which have generally focused on tech censorship. And I think, changes to the law that should be made. So, basically I have a broad thesis that basically I think we need to conceptualize the right to use Facebook and Twitter as a kind of civil right. And that, and that like we, that they shouldn't be able to violate. And so, exactly where like the rubber meets the road on things like monetization is a little bit of a trickier question, but certainly like, I don't think Twitter should be able to just deprive you of your Twitter account without proof that you violated the law. Like,
so a thing or two about Section 230.
I do actually.
That's one of my favorite subjects. So I find that very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on like how you would propose to change that law without getting? I mean, because I know that we don't have
Sure.
forever to talk. And we also want to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, but that's very interesting to me. So that's very tempting to go down this road.
So I'm kind of like, I look at Section 230 and it's like, I see reforming Section 230 as kind of a blunt. It's like using a hammer. Like, and if we only have a blunt object available to us, then, well, I guess we got a blunt object, right? Like, let's use it. But I think that, my basic proposal has always been there should just be a private right of action created at the federal level for Americans, that if they're wrongfully terminated from a platform, they can walk into federal court, get an injunction and attorney's fees, and force the companies to restore their account. Like really, really simple. Like, because to me, it's like the Section 230 fix to this is essentially saying, oh, well, you Facebook and Twitter, you're wronging people, right? You're banning people wrongfully. You shouldn't do that. And so how we're going to fix that problem is we're going to say that when somebody else sues you for defamation, you're going to have more risk of paying off a judgment to them. And to me, it's like, well, you're not vindicating the actual injury suffered by the people who've been harmed. You're vindicating someone else's injury. Like that, to me, that's not direct. And whether that injury should be vindicated by Facebook and Twitter is not at all clear to me. It's like, seems like, given how much stuff comes onto their platform at all times, like they really shouldn't ultimately be responsible for that. But it's like, I think part of the way we should frame it is like, and this is why we are justified in imposing this new regulation on you, which just says you have to be treated like a common carrier and you don't get to pick and choose between who uses your platform or not. So that's how I view things.
Interesting. We have a question, which I think is for you.
Sure.
As a member of the Federalist Society, are you disappointed in Amy Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh demurring in controversial high-profile cases?
I mean, well, so as a member of the Federalist Society, that's I think I still pay dues. I don't know. I wouldn't say I forgot to go to the conference last week. Like I wouldn't say I don't think I've ever been to the actual main Federalist Society conference. So, but that's it. As a conservative lawyer, I mean, it depends on the case. Like I'm always reluctant to judge any case that I haven't read the opinions of, and I'm not like, okay, this is sound or this is ridiculous. And maybe that doesn't sound, there's some cases where like I read opinions, I'm like, but I haven't read an opinion from Amy Coney Barrett or Kavanaugh that's been like, oh, that's terrible, right? That makes no sense. That's ridiculous. And when I read one of those opinions, I'll let you know. But I've read opinions like that from Gorsuch, and I've read opinions like that from John Roberts a million times. Still have yet to read the Kavanaugh or Barrett opinion.
Yeah,
that makes me think that they're out of line.
I would agree. And to be fair, I mean, Barrett is. I mean, she's new enough that there's not as much material as there are for, let's say, Justice Thomas, for example.
Right. And it's like a lot of the things people get upset about are these like weird like demurrals on like, oh, are you going to grant certiorari or are you going to grant a stay or something? And it's like there's a lot of like. So for people to understand, like that's just like whether or not the court's going to hear a case, whether they're going to lift an injunction in the short term. like before they actually end up hearing the case. Hopefully, I mean, so there's a lot of procedural reasons why like a judge who might end up siding with you is not going to give you the relief you want early on a for like your dramatic early procedural relief. And and also there are a lot of good procedural reasons not to grant that relief. It's supposed to be hard to get, or so it's one of those situations where, absent reading, when I finally read an opinion where I'm like, what is this person doing? Like when I read, but the Bostock opinion by Gorsuch, I'm like, what is this person doing? Like, that's a silly opinion. What are you doing?
It took me a little while to sort of understand the logic, because the logic that he did take, I will admit, was different than the ways that we've applied, sex discrimination in the past.
Yeah.
But it felt a little bit like a creative argument, and he wanted to maybe fit it into a particular result. But
I was routinely told that sex and gender identity were different. I thought that was the entire basis for the underlying logic of all these positions and why these things needed protection. So that to then pretend that they are the same for the purposes of the Civil Rights Act is like kind of, okay, really? Like yeah, you guys are playing both sides of this debate. Like, you want it to be different in one context and the same in the other. Like, I don't think that works.
Yeah, it's one interpretation, I suppose. We actually have another question for you, I think, on some of the stuff we were talking about before. On government regulating social media, what about the fact that they are a private business and should be allowed to run their business as they see fit?
Who said, when did I say that? It turns out in America that the question of whether or not being a private business is sufficient to insulate you from government regulation was settled in the 1880s with with like the early interstate commerce laws that regulated railroad rates. Certainly that debate was settled in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Acts of 1964. I mean, if you really think that, your logic, Super K Pill, leads to the conclusion that the Civil Rights Acts were wrong and that people should be free to discriminate against African Americans in restaurants and hotels. I don't think that's right. I think they absolutely should be prohibited from that sort of discrimination. But if you want your libertarian utopia, feel free to argue for it.
Yeah, that's true. And it is also the case that the larger that a business gets, the more regulation that they should expect to see, because obviously the more power they have and whatnot.
There's I think Randy Barnett, who's like no normal conservative. Like, Randy Barnett's a very good libertarian, did a great speech at the Federalist Society that I actually watched, where he made the point that just because something is there's like a public interest in this non-governmental activity. Right? Like, the fact that Facebook and Twitter have monopolized such a large portion of the public square means that if there is a public concern in how they wield their power to censor or not censor people, simply saying they're a private company and can do whatever they want. Well, one, that hasn't been true for 140 years. But two, it sort of sidesteps the question of the fact that there is this central public interest in making sure people are able to speak their minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Andrew, welcome. Legal Mindset.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Good stuff. That's great. Pastor Mindset.
Angry Vanling wants to know.
It'll happen one. I was a religious studies major. I don't know if people knew that. I abandoned my seminary for the evil ways of law school. So it happens sometimes. But Will, nice to meet you, by the way.
Nice to meet you too, man. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know.
Yeah,
I might have briefly ran each other on the Ricky Edda stream. I don't know.
You were coming off as I was coming on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna say it got like a really fast rotating door towards the end there.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
only so many slots, so many lawyers.
Yeah, I know. That's the 10 max.
But I like this size chat. You can get into an actual conversation about like the Commerce Clause and like the scope of the Commerce Clause, and
right.
I mean that's like when you get 9 people, it's just so difficult to get a thorough, thought out opinion on.
I know. Yeah, absolutely. And especially when it's like, when you're also particularly with a group of people that all have ideas that they energetically want to get out at the same time. So it's like, you really have to try to like get your elbows out. And I don't like doing that too much, even though, my background is in litigation. I'm used to certain rules that everybody has to abide by,
Yeah.
But on that note, let's turn to the Kyle Rittenhouse case. So
which one, the criminal one or the civil one? Are we talking about the civil one yet?
Yes.
Let's talk about the one where we won. Let's talk about the criminal.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am a pessimist on the civil front. Like, I don't know.
Really? You're a pessimist?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like defamation's already like the least plaintiff friendly area of law in the country, which I don't think it should be, but it is. I actually, I don't know. There's a great article by like Richard Epstein from like 20 years ago or something, where he's like, the victims of defamation didn't do anything. They're pretty innocent. Maybe this should be more kind of like strict liability with a liability cap or something like that, where it's just like, we don't care why you said something false that damaged someone's reputation. If you said something false that damages someone's reputation, you need to pay for that. And that would be, I think that probably would be a better world with a much more responsible media. Holy cow, would that be good for media responsibility? But under current law, he was indicted for murder. Like, you know, they get to, we can get into this more, but he was indicted for murder. So anybody who's, and it wasn't the false statements that made him a public figure. It was the indictment and like the activity. So basically like it's going to be the actual malice standard almost certainly that applies.
Right.
And so you have to prove knowing lying about Rittenhouse. And it's like, and also then damages above and beyond, the fact that he was indicted for murder and prosecuted for it. Like,
right.
Like the other reputational damages, right? Like, okay.
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
How much does being called a white supremacist damage you above and beyond being called a murderer? Right. I mean,
right. And being prosecuted for it and having that be on live television for like, I mean, how do you articulate distinct damages? And then, Yeah,
and the other thing, though, I was bringing up was the civil case, because there was just a plaintiff's lawyer in Denver who just filed on behalf of Rosenbaum and Grosskreutz for civil damages. Yes,
well, that should also be a loser too.
That should definitely be because it's true. Like you can definitely take in all of Grosskreuz's testimony from this case and apply it to the other one, where he definitely said I was pointing my gun at him before he shot me.
Like, I think you throw that in the motion to dismiss, right? Like normally motion to dismiss don't have that many exhibits, but you literally just like exhibit one of the motion to dismiss the trial transcript from the Rittenhouse case, and I can continually show you this one page where he admits that like it was self-defense.
It's like contributory negligence. I brought my illegal gun to a riot.
Yeah. Maybe they're venue shopping for.
Do you think that passes the 50% plus one threshold?
Oh my gosh! Yes.
Okay, but I mean, it's one of those situations where it's like when you read it, you're like, this is ridiculous, but of course it's happening. Of course it is, right?
Well, like, because there's a segment of the population that's not able to let it go, and that there was an injustice that happens. I mean, the talking heads, come out. Yeah. This is an injustice. Even Biden in his statement, I'm angry, but. So he qualifies the whole statement by he's angry. Well, what are you angry about? That the jury process functions? You know what I mean?
It's these folks right here. Let's talk about this now. The blue check mafia, so to speak, right? So, Will, what are your thoughts on these kind of comments?
I mean, tweeted that Ruffalo tweet where he decided to use a pet name for a convicted child rapist. I don't know if that's his habit or what. Like, do you do that normally? Is it your regular? Do you regularly interact with child rapists, Mr. Ruffalo? And when you do, what sort of names do you call them? Or is this a unique case? Like, what is like? There's just this sort of disconnect where they're like stuck in the narrative, right? They can't route out of it. Like they've already invested too much. So it's like he took the gun across state lines. So they say, he killed these two heroes who were standing up for Black lives. In reality, he was attacked. He was a victim of multiple very serious assaults, defended himself from those assaults, and then was victimized by a mass media demonization campaign and a malicious prosecution. To me, it's like, and it's sort of like there's two parts. There's the liberals who there's the Maria Shriver who doesn't understand how someone got off with murder, cough Ted Kennedy and cough. And then I don't care what Rage Against the Machine thinks about
but that's just so ironic.
It is ironic coming from Rage Against the Machine.
So ironic.
The machine didn't succeed.
All of their music is so anti-police, and it's just it's very interesting.
Anti-establishment. It used to be, now it's super pro-establishment. It's just
no, it's like
they're in a very weird segment in America right now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like there's just like the idea here is almost, it's like, criminal justice reform and leniency for everyone except our class enemies, and in which case we throw the book at them. Like it's just almost like, I think I saw some link on Twitter that posted I think it was like Solzhenitsyn, who posted like their take, the Soviet Russia take on self-defense was like, you could only use the exact amount of force necessary to repel the attack. You should have run away or not even gotten into the fight. And it's like, there's something like inherent where I feel like they're like this, the leftists just realize that part of their team is like these street violent thugs who are going to attack people. And like that defending them requires not just like lax prosecution of rioters, but also weakening self-defense rules so that the, basically the crazy lefty protesters can do whatever violent things they want. And the only response available to broader society is just to simply concede and give up rather than either prosecute them or defend themselves against their violent attacks.
I mean, I think the best weapon is the DAs. I mean, we've seen that right now. And I think we've seen, the campaign to get these DAs in power. I mean, even, I've seen these DAs in Florida. The thing is, Florida's a pretty base state. But I mean, when I was in Orlando, we had a DA come in that took it entirely the other direction, right? So you can get people in locally that can really shift these things in the way crimes are prosecuted and the type of people that are prosecuted and for what, right? So I think they're going to see that as a powerful tool going forward.
Yeah, no, it's scary. And how much money they're willing to throw into these DA races to get like complete lunatics.
For small DA races. I mean, these are tiny races in the scope of the national scale.
Right.
Yeah. Here's a question. If defamation, 1970s Viva Frog.
I love the hair.
Viva
I love that hair.
I was confused for a second there. I was like, oh, wait, I saw Viva in the chat saying he was walking his dog. He'd be here in a minute. If defamation is hard to prove, what about malicious prosecution?
Even
How
harder.
can Binger get away with blatant misconduct on the stand?
I'll defer on that question. Like I know a decent amount about defamation law because I've done the research and had people come to me with defamation stuff when I've, basically people come to me. I think Kurt Schlichter joked, he's like, when somebody comes to me with a defamation matter, I start by telling them you have a bad case, and then I start reading about it, right? Like,
yes,
and it's, and so I've read enough about defamation law to be like, okay, it's rough. But my understanding is malicious prosecution law requires extraordinary bad behavior on the part of prosecutors, and that it would be very hard to prove.
Yeah, and that's it exactly, Will. It's so difficult, and it rarely ever happens, and even in egregious situations. I mean, at this point, I think we were talking on the stream, Alita, that the worst thing we can probably imagine is a written reprimand or some sort of, just slap on the wrist from the Wisconsin bar because of all the ethical violations and maybe the volume of complaints, because I imagine it will be high. Right, I imagine there's a lot of people that will complain about Binger and Krause because they watched that, because they actually watched it, right? But I mean, they're not going to disbar them, and they're certainly not going to have any sort of harsh punishment for them.
I would be surprised if they got disbarred for it. To be perfectly honest, I mean, because it's let's face it, like they weren't the ones that chose to actually pursue charges against Rittenhouse, right? Like that was the DA that they work for. So there's obviously some support for a lot of their actions and their behavior. And I would assume that if there was some disagreement back at the office as to their tactics and their strategies, that after day one of that, there probably would have been a discussion back at the office and maybe a little bit of a change of those strategies and tactics after that. So the fact that they continued throughout the entire trial tells me that probably he just has a lot of support.
Yeah, it's a game. It's a game, right? Because the game is that the DA can say, oh, well, it's the lawyer's decision what they do, what they go forward to it, their trial tactics. That's all them. But they're giving them their marching orders. They're telling them what to go for. They're telling them, what to drop, what to no pros. They're giving them those directives, right? And they've got the leeway to do that. That is, by the way, a big difference between the state and the feds, right? With the feds, because the feds control so much of it, they've got much more control over, what they do, what they charge, what they don't charge.
Yeah. By the way, I just realized that I think my volume was a little bit loud. So hopefully I fixed things. Do you guys notice any difference?
I prefer it when you're loud, Alita.
Oh, thank you.
You're both, I don't know. Hopefully I sound the right volume. You guys.
You're good.
Yeah,
You're good.
I think so. Legal Mindset, you will be invited back now. No, just kidding.
Well, no, actually, you know what's funny, Alita? My mom scolded me after the last one. She's like, you talked over her too much. I'm like, we were making jokes. So like, I was when her dog jumped up. It's normal.
Yeah, for sure. And we have another player's entered the chat. Hey, Viva, how are you?
All right, I got my headband on now.
You look like a soccer player now.
Yeah, I think we briefly got to shake hands at like the Tim Pool thing where I got sick. I don't know if you got sick at that.
From you.
I didn't get sick. I'm glad I didn't get sick and that no one thought I was the typhoid Mary who infected everyone from Canada.
Oh no.
The beaver fever.
They all get sick. I was certain they were going to say like the only foreigner we had was Viva, and he came in with the coupe and gave it to all of us.
We're not Canada. We don't blame foreigners, Viva.
Yeah. LOL.
Oh,
you know, that's it. The hair's gotten long enough now that I can bandana it backwards. So I've gone full midlife crisis.
Nice. You've gone full COVID hair.
I should have done it 2 years ago. It would have been ponytail length, but I'm going to try to go back to that pic that someone had of me in the avatar. There it is, 1970s Viva Fry. Oh man, no, it's
we have another. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, we have another super chat. If a major network ignores salient evidence readily available for months and still smear a person prior to trial, why is that not malicious?
Because of exactly what Will said. It's something that's been out there for a while. They've been charged for a while, right? So how did it go above and beyond that? And they can come up with some lie about, okay, well, we were given this information and we never vetted it. Now we can say, okay, you should have a responsibility to do that. It's kind of incompetent of you not to do that. But is it malicious?
It's also just like the technical difference of how malice is understood in libel law versus how it's understood in common usage, right? Like,
yes,
in common usage, it's malice is like anger or meanness, whereas in libel law, it's like it's a technical meaning of like knowing falsehood or reckless disregard of the truth. So it's really about like, they could have been mean, but like, did they knowingly lie about these things? That's the real question. And remember, you have to prove that they knowingly lied, which requires some insight into their state of mind via emails or circumstances or something. And it's just, it's really, really hard to do that. And I mean, they, remember, they just get up and be like, this was, we just went off the indictment, like, which was filed. Like that we thought we were telling the truth because he was indicted for murder. So
right. And that reminds me of kind of what Will and I we were talking about before we went live was kind of this difference between a common understanding, a colloquial understanding of a certain term, and a legal understanding of a certain term. Like we were talking about how people were saying that how Kyle shouldn't have been there. There's two different versions of should and shouldn't, right? There's the parental kind of meaning of like whether a 17-year-old should have been there, whether it was wise to be there, or versus whether he had any right or didn't have a legal right to be there.
It's like what's his name, Lionel. First of all, I was just showing the dog for Andrew Bannerling. The dog is fine. No tick issues that we know of yet. There's the truth. And the truth, I forget what it was, what Lionel had said, but it's the thing about the media misrepresentations, setting aside defamation. Can you imagine how much different the expectation for the trial would have been had the media, in order not to place the blame on the alleged victims of the shootings of that night, but to set the context so that people understood that these were not three black males, they were not three BLM supporters, they were in fact three criminals with lengthy criminal histories of the worst order who were attacking Kyle. So even if it turns out to not have any impact on the substance of the trial, first of all, when you taint the jury pool through inaccurate reporting, that maybe they should have known the truth and not half truths, but it would have attenuated people's expectations and at least contextualized what might have actually gone down that night. And it's like you said, 14 months of lies and expectations based on those lies. You're going to get people who don't understand come acquittal, come verdict time.
Oh yeah, horribly irresponsible, obviously, right? Like, the question of whether or not I think from a legal perspective, Rittenhouse would prevail if he sues anybody for defamation is very different from the moral question of, how these media outlets behave, which was just contemptible for the most part.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the Project Veritas with the New York Times, wasn't that the one instance where the judge had even said there might be actual malice, so it's kind of a big deal? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, it was specific to the circumstances because it was about the timing of how quickly they had timestamps for like how quickly the New York Times got the initial substance for the report and then published. And basically Veritas's argument was like, you took half an hour, which means you couldn't have done basic due diligence, which is evidence of recklessness. And the judge bought that argument.
No, well, at least he said it'll be argued on the merits, but it was plausible because the release of those two, the reports, which they could not have analyzed, studied, written a piece on, coordinated release, what do they call it? Will, there was a word for embargoing. There was They were clearly working together behind the scenes, and then agreed to release their information at the same time, or within short order, just to pad their file so they could make the allegations they made.
Speaking of plausibility, this super chat is asking about defamation. I believe isn't the discovery worth it to see if there was malicious prosecution, or will the judge throw it out with the first motion to dismiss?
Well, that's the issue, right? Is that I don't think they're getting discovery.
Yeah. Even if they're in federal court operating under, even if they're not dealing with the anti-SLAPP motion, which is if you're in state court dealing with an anti-SLAPP motion, you're in really, really bad shape, because you need to prove that's where you just not have to show that you have a plausible claim for relief, but like show that you're likely to prevail, which is like you need to be 50% plus one ahead before you take any discovery. That's you're not getting there.
That's a very hefty burden to jump over before
like
you know for sure what kind of
to
information.
prove you're likely to win is that's a lot. That's hard. As I said, this is like the least plaintiff-friendly area of law in the United States. But as for, I think, even on just a straight motion to dismiss, like you still have to like make some sort of showing that's plausible. So like, you can't just assert they acted maliciously. Like you need to have something to point to that is your evidence of malice. And when they can point to no, here's the criminal indictment, it's just going to be challenging.
So I've also gotten questions about what the long-term implications of this verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse case will have. If you guys think of anything, I mean, because obviously this is a trial court decision. It doesn't really have any real precedent for any. It's not binding for any other decisions. But I know a lot of people are sort of having. That's one of the conversations that's going on right now is what this kind of means for the future. For maybe more politically more than anything else.
I think there's legal and non-legal, right? So I mean, like in legal terms, I guess in the legal world, it's more of a defensive thing, right? So we're not seeing, self-defense pretty much obliterated, as a legal standard, right? But I mean, I think you're right exactly in the political or social realm. I also think this is something that woke a lot of people up, which was what, I loved about our streams with Ricada, because a lot of people that were watching them just didn't even know the facts until they got to the trial. And they'd certainly only heard one viewpoint, which, like you said, was saying that, hey, these are black people. This happened at a BLM riot, right? There's people on Twitter, multiple people, you've posted about this, Alita, multiple times, that have said, I've been woken up to this. I thought everyone that was shot was black, right? I had no clue, right? And I thought they were white supremacists. And turns out Kyle, if they were going to prove he was a white supremacist after having his phone and having this much time in the FBI and everything else, they would have proved it. But they had nothing.
Right.
It's to me, I mean, Canadian, totally different self-defense laws, open carry laws in Canada basically don't exist. You're actually not allowed owning a firearm specifically for the purposes of self-defense or home defense. Although, if you happen to have one, whatever. But no, what I think is going to be the longest lasting impact of this. It didn't gut self-defense, but it certainly is going to make people think twice, because even if you win on the merits, you've gone through a year and a half of hell. But I think what people should be realizing and should be outraged about is the absolute abandonment by the authorities of Kenosha to the arsonists and the rioters. And I'm not saying BLM. We've seen the evidence now. I don't think I saw anybody that night that looked like they were out there for sincere equality movement, BLM principles. What we saw was just lawlessness, mayhem, and the authorities abandoning Kenosha to the hands of arsonists and looters and rioters. And I think that should be the lasting impact, is that the government seems to be failing the people to such a point where you saw not just one or two people with guns, but 100 who had to go in there and do what the police were failing to do, which is protect people and property. And that should be the lasting political impact from this. I hope it will be. But other than not undoing the most basic constitutional right to Second Amendment and self-defense, this shed a light on the absolute abandonment of the authorities of the people of America.
Yeah, I mean, I saw there was a bunch of liberals talking about the quote unquote Rittenhouse precedent. They're like, oh, the Rittenhouse precedent has been set. And I'm like, you guys are really not that familiar with like Anglo-American law, are you? Because like self-defense has been around pre the founding. It's been around for like 1,000 years. So the precedent set there is no precedent set. It's literally just a straightforward application of like millennia old self-defense law. You can defend yourself if someone tries to kill you, or like threatens you with deadly force and makes you reasonably perceive that they are trying to kill you.
So I I have had some folks over here because I'm in South Korea, and I've had some folks ask, well, why didn't the police help? And because they didn't know the facts. They were just hearing the jury verdict and everything else and the basic facts, and they didn't catch the fact that the police weren't policing this area. To them, that was like kind of like mind blowing. It's like, oh yeah, the police have retreated and they are treating this as an abandoned area. It's just whatever happens in there happens, right? That's a very foreign concept.
And at the very least, leave it to Binger to make people appreciate the value of
leave it to Binger. It's like leave it to Binger.
not bad. Leave it to Binger.
That was good.
But leave it to Binger to say something so stupid that if you carry a gun, you've abandoned your right to self-defense. I mean, let that sink in people's heads. Where, oh, that's right. If I'm being pursued by someone who's bigger than me, I don't know that he happens to be the most violent sexual predator you can imagine. I don't know that, but I'm supposed to put down my firearm and go mano a mano with someone who wants to smash my skull in. That is what the Second Amendment and self-defense is for. Right. I can appreciate now, like, the gun is the ultimate equalizer because a frail old lady can take on the biggest, burliest criminal with a handgun. That's what it is for. And it's not for dropping it so you can go be equals when you shouldn't be equal when you're defending yourself against an attack. So I think people are realizing that as well, which is leave it to Binger.
Thanks, Rick.
Oh, God.
That was a good one.
Viva, if you didn't catch when Rosenbaum yelled, "I declare fisticuffs at dawn," that's binding.
And as if it was not, they're pulling the same mistake in the Ahmaud Arbery trial right now, where
yes.
Don't bring a gun to a knife fight. Well, you're assuming it's mutual combat, which it wasn't. In Ahmaud Arbery, I think it's something totally different. In Rittenhouse, it wasn't mutual combat. It was an attack by a mob of individuals who wanted to disarm and then do worse to Kyle Rittenhouse. He happened to be there with a legal carry firearm. If you don't like that idea, you can disagree with the Second Amendment, but that's what the Americans have a constitution for, and that's why the Australians are being, literally hauled off to. Okay, I can't finish that sentence. Hauled off to facilities.
Yes.
So
I hate to duck out for like 5 minutes, but I think you guys can hold down the fort for a second while I take a peek or something.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, come on back.
I'll get Winston in the avatar in the screen up on the upper. But no, it's he shouldn't have been there with the gun. Okay, that's a moral question. If you were my kid, don't say stay home. Nothing good happens. Let the people wreak havoc. But it's you have second.
You're absolutely right, though, Viva, and that's the narrative. The narrative is the vigilantism, that this sets a precedent for, and Will mention as well, this sets a precedent for vigilantism, right? People going out there and actively asserting themselves, right? I mean, and it's totally a false narrative, right? Because that's not why they weren't there to be Batman or Superman or go arrest people or whatever. They were there to do what they essentially did, and it just so happened that they picked Kyle off, right? I mean, he was the gazelle that wandered away from the herd, and you got targeted.
That reminds me of the gazelle line from was it 40-Year-Old Virgin? I think it was 40-Year-Old Virgin. But that they saw a gazelle and they were ready to pounce. But and that's the issue. Is difference also between the McMichaels case. In my humble opinion, I appreciate people will disagree. Rittenhouse did not show up with the gun to play law enforcement. He actually went there to, in his naive 17-year-old head, to administer first aid and to make sure people didn't get hurt and things didn't get out of hand. Whereas the McMichaels went thinking they were playing cops and robber and arresting who they thought was committing some act of crime 2 weeks earlier. So totally different.
I would agree
context.
with that. Yeah.
But people think that Rittenhouse went out there looking. If you saw the video, it was quite clear that not only did he not go out there looking to use the gun, he only used it at de minimis, as little as possible, and only when pushed to the absolute limits of people who wanted to take that gun from him. But one thing I was shocked about, because I didn't know it, because nobody reported on it. I thought it was just Rittenhouse out there with an AR-15. I had no idea there were upwards of 100 people doing exactly what Rittenhouse was doing.
Neither did I. I didn't know there were that many people. I mean, the volume of people was even to me shocking, and I knew there were other people, but not that many.
No, right? and I didn't know that the cops literally saw them, literally drove by these guys, all carrying AR-15s. They know the law obviously better than I do of Wisconsin. All legal carries. Didn't think to ask them, show me your age. Do you have a license for this? Because it's America. It's different than Canada. Didn't tell them to disperse and go home. Didn't say, get out of here with these guns. What the hell are you guys doing? And there were 16 people on the car doctor place alone. So, I mean, facts that I didn't know. And I did not know how riotous and violent the mob was. I didn't know that there was actually no legitimate BLM or activist group there. It just appeared to only be people hell-bent on burning down gas stations and starting fires.
Well, hold on, Viva. As he characterized it, they were light dumpster fires. They were just minor fires.
Just a little burning.
And then when he puts out when he puts it out with the fire extinguisher, why you do that? Why'd you put out the fire?
I mean, they were just about to get the s'mores out. That's so rude.
You can't cook s'mores off black smoke fire. You have to wait for the amber coals. Everyone knows that.
Yeah, it's really insane.
I mean, but that's why the whole argument about provocation was just bogus in its entirety, right? Because the prosecution was, as we've discussed before, the prosecution, of course, was trying to show this as well, he wasn't supposed to be carrying that gun. He was not allowed to be carrying that gun. Therefore, he was provoking other people without taking that logical step that you have to show that the people supposedly being provoked had to know that he was illegally carrying it at the very least. At the very least.
Well, but if having a gun public visible is provocation, as Binger was saying, setting aside the age issue, open carry is provocation,
also
per se.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what I didn't like, which was the risk of Kyle testifying, is that they got him to admit that he pointed the gun, which then I could understand that could be provocation in theory. I as a matter of fact didn't happen to think he was pointing it at Grosskreutz. I think even if he was, it was wholly justified because Grosskreutz was mobbing him and pointing a gun, but that was the risk. So pointing a gun, I can understand that being provocation, but just being there with a gun only in the minds of, I don't want to say like big city folk, Montreal's not a big city, but it's only in the mind of city folk where you don't see people walking around carrying guns all that often who are not police, that you could even have that reflex in the first place.
Well, and they tried to criminalize this. This just goes back to a point that both of you made, which is they were trying to criminalize Kyle for being naive, right? You're allowed to be naive. You're allowed to have good intent. You're allowed to think that, hey, maybe rioters will want medical care. And you know what? I think that is pretty naive, right? To think that people who are Antifa, who are these woke, crazy leftists, are actually going to want help from anybody, right? Who's there to protect property rather than to destroy it. But it's not criminal to be naive, and to try to put that on Kyle and make him guilty for that, was not only troublesome, but frankly, it was kind of disgusting that Binger would go there and imply that standard, because that's the standard that exists nowhere in the law.
Sure. Kyle had a $2 million bond. Who was the kid that shot a teacher and a friend at someone at high school and was let out on $75,000 bond basically the same day?
I don't know.
Happened in the States. Someone in the
was this?
Was that the one that you mentioned? Hold on.
It might someone in the chat will get to it, but it's like where everyone's pretending that this is a racial issue that Kyle got off because he was white. It was the kid. The Wakusha, the one that just the guy that just essentially did the No.
But he was out on a bond, $1,000 bond. That's the point.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, and that was 2 days before. 2 days before, and he had posted something about the Rittenhouse verdict on his Facebook. Social media. By the way, everyone should appreciate this. This is the scary thing. When they don't release the name of the accused, and then there is time to scrub their social media so that other sleuths of the internet, there's one guy doing particularly good work on this, cannot go and screenshot, screen grab, record their social media postings. You end up allowing them to scrub relevant information that might allow people to deduce ill intent and not an accident. But people got to this one quickly because they got the name out quickly enough and saved some very interesting and arguably incriminating videos.
Well, it's always interesting how they rush to cover this up and rush to leave it. Okay, this is a suspect and this is not, because it's a particular person and a particular person of a particular persuasion. If it was a person who, let's say, was of the Kyle Rittenhouse looking persuasion, you better believe they would be fully doxxed within seconds, right?
But that's also an interesting point about social media, and it also reminded me of something that I saw on Twitter about the difference between the social media activities of Richie McGinnis and Gage Grosskreutz, right? Because obviously there's so much information that people have been able to find on Gage Grosskreutz based on the things that he's posted on Reddit and elsewhere, and Facebook. Obviously, that came into trial even, but somebody kind of highlighted the differences between the two. That like, okay, this is somebody who's then going around and kind of seeking attention online, and it actually ends up biting you in the butt. To put it nicely. But then on the other hand, you have a witness like Richie McGinnis, who, I mean, obviously he also is not, he's not the subject of any kind of a lawsuit, right? He's just a witness. But, he came in, he made his testimony, he went quiet, he went to the beach and he went surfing, and that was it. It's an interesting sort of disparity that I noticed there. But yeah, social media activity of anyone involved in these high profile cases is always very, very risky, to say the least.
Well, no, it's just there's a reason why they try to hold, why the media, I believe, tries to hold off in certain circumstances identifying, and it's so that they can have some control in either damage control or scrub their social media footprint so that nobody can see the individual who just drove a truck allegedly through a group in Wisconsin, had posted some things that might indicate that this might have been racially motivated, Rittenhouse motivated, could have been bond law enforcement issue related. They would prefer to get that off the internet before identifying the individual. But with other people, identify the cop right away so that everybody can unleash the social media mob on them, and so that they can go start digging up things to further incriminate them. So it's a double standards, but it's the extremely risky thing of not releasing the names, even if they are alleged, unless they're minors, because you prevent people from going to do the research that journalists used to do once upon a time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And the person's name was Simpkins. People in the chat, the Texas kid, 75,000 after shooting. I don't think he killed three. I don't think he killed anybody. I think he just shot. He shot two people. His teacher in the back. Simpkins, $75,000 bond. If race were an issue, kid was black, released on bond basically the same day. Rittenhouse kept in jail on what was arguably clear-cut self-defense, if not at the very least after the decision, and two set rules.
And here's the thing about bail too, is that there's such wide discretion with it that it's a dangerous thing with the level of discretion with the range, right? So Kyle being able to be at this wild range, and then people able to be at very small ranges, right? And that's one of the things why when I go back to talking about the DAs and the politicization of the DAs and the politicization of the judicial process, I mean that's why it's so problematic, right? I mean we're seeing how problematic that can be.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, here's a super chat for Will. Will, can you offer your thoughts on the long-term implications of the case on American society and politics in general, not precedent? So
okay,
kind of touched on that a little earlier.
Yeah, and I definitely focused on like the legal side of that. Society, seems like there's a broad lack of understanding about self-defense, which suggests that maybe that right will be eroded in the coming years over the course of different court decisions, right? Like there's not some federal statute enacting self-defense. There are generally these state statutes, but you might see a push to change the law. And in terms of broader society, I'm amazed. I'm actually glad there was a verdict. It gives you some hope that people can come to an agreement when basic evidence. I think it's one of these cases where if there were a hung jury, it would sort of reaffirm like, oh, we're watching two different movies as a society. Like this there's not going to be a clear self-defense case in this. So if you can't get an acquittal on this, then what can you get an acquittal on? And so we're just going to end up like needing, it's just going to like increase the split. I think it's like ultimately, I mean, I guess it's almost like we avoided a massive like problem that I think would have resulted from a hung jury. Like there aren't that many riots. There aren't, the fact of the prosecution itself is really offensive. It means that everybody needs to take seriously that, that using your self-defense rights now has risks of being unjustly prosecuted, which is itself a punishment.
I think that's a very important point is that, I've heard people saying, that are very concerned with the political implications of this verdict being a bit more left leaning, saying that this is going to mean that people, who are very, 2A, people that are 2A advocates, right? Saying that they're just going to be emboldened to walk around with guns out blazing all the time. I doubt it, because they're also looking at the example of what Kyle Rittenhouse just went through and thinking his life will never be the same.
Well,
his life, like, even though he's not going to jail for the rest of his life, but like, so he's not going to be able to live a normal life of any normal, he's an adult now, but he became an adult in this whole process.
And it's the same. The McCloskey's case was another one where even exercising your Second Amendment, and if you don't believe it was self-defense, at least exercising your Second Amendment rights, where the protesters barging through a gate on a private street and the McCloskeys brandish firearms or at least hold firearms in front of their property, indicating they should the group should look elsewhere if they're looking for trouble, and then they get prosecuted. You have the prosecution tampering with evidence in that case, tampering with evidence to frame the guilt of the accused. And at the end of it, they pleaded guilty, and I think they got pardoned.
They
but
pled guilty to like a misdemeanor gun possession charge or something like that.
Yeah, and then
like
they got
$1,500 fine.
Yeah, but even then, in the case that was, if you are living in that neighborhood and you see that type of a group of people busting down a gate and storming through a private street, you might be inclined to do the same thing and think you're justified in that level of deterrence. Even they got took through the ringer. They had to plead guilty. They got pardoned. Big deal. They still, had to plead guilty to a misdemeanor.
Still had to pay I'm sure they paid tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees that they wouldn't have paid had, it's a big difference between these cases getting prosecuted and not. Like the Rittenhouse defense must have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for that trial, right?
For sure,
easily. With all the mock trials, like they went pretty hard, and so that must have been very expensive.
And he's likely to have more lawsuits on top of that.
Yeah. So do you really want? I mean, the real answer here is actually engaging in lawful self-defense. You got to be really, really careful because you might well be on the hook for legal fees. And that's very different. It's one thing, the precedent when someone's not prosecuted at all is very different from the precedent when somebody's prosecuted and ultimately acquitted after a year-long legal ordeal.
No, the precedent that the powers that be wanted to establish was let the rioters riot. Police are going to abandon small towns and don't fend for yourself. Let them go through and burn and destroy and loot. And that's it. And then we'll come back. Then the cops will come and clean it up the next day. But if you dare go in there and something like this escalates when it shouldn't have been this case in the first place, the prosecutors will go after you with the full extent of the law. And you're still dealing with a town that had been devastated by looting, riots, and arson. So,
and let's be fair. Let me just say, let's be fair. I think some people are intimidated by what happened to Kyle, right? Some people look at what happened to Kyle and say, look, they might have gone to Kenosha the first time, but if there's Kenosha part 2 or part 3, they're not showing up because they don't want that to be them. There's a lot of people who say, look, let somebody else fight that fight. Nobody wants to go through that legal battle and come out where you're on the edge of your seat, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing whether it's going to be a hung jury, whether it's going to be another trial, whether there's going to be a conviction. Who knew? Right.
Yeah.
That was too close for comfort, honestly.
Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say, so we can move.
Oh, sorry. Well, I didn't mean
I
forgot it.
Well, here's a question. Even with the not guilty in the right house, will he go into hiding because of how big the case was and the amount of people watching? I would imagine so.
I'm going to make a white pill prediction. I think Rittenhouse is going to be destined for actual great things in his life. I think he will get past this. Above and beyond the trauma of the evening, he will get past the political trauma of this and what I think was malicious prosecution. And I think it will influence his career path in life. I don't think it's going to destroy him to the point where he's going to regress into criminality. We've seen who he was on the stand now. I had no idea who he was. And if nothing else good came out of his testimony, people know what his personality is. Seems like a very intelligent kid, innocent, but I think he's going to learn the right lessons from this. And I think this will influence him either politically or career-wise going forward, but in a good way. That's my white pill prediction.
I mean, but I wouldn't be surprised if he...
I don't want to object to that,
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did take a period of time to just lay low and stay out of the public eye, because he probably is kind of tired of that, I would imagine. Like he would probably like a little bit of anonymity for a little bit. I would imagine.
That I think he should do, and I don't think he should have gone on Tucker Carlson so close to the trial. I think he should lay low now easily for months. And if what I've heard he said on the Tucker Carlson interview is correct, it might confirm that I think he should be laying low and not making public statements. But he's got his own team.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also the fact of the documentary that was being filmed during the trial, right? If I had been his lawyer, I would have very much not wanted to have any cameras anywhere nearby. I mean, Will, what are your thoughts on that, on the documentary for it?
Well, I mean, I know the people. I actually know the guy doing it, right?
So, okay.
Conflict of interest.
Scooter Downey is, I think, on. He's the producer for Tucker Carlson Originals. He did some stuff for Cernovich in the past. So good guy. I'm sure they're doing good work. I think. I don't know. I don't have any strong views on whether it's a good idea for him to do a documentary beforehand. I'll leave that to him and his people and what he feels like he wants to do. I'm sure he wanted to get his voice out there. And you got to imagine, like, he was looking at a conviction. I'm sure he wanted people filming with him. So, in the event of a conviction, he would have, before he gets, taken off to jail, he has like the recording of like, this is what I was doing, this is what I was dealing with. So
yeah, that's fair.
That said, now that he's free, I think you kind of go take 6 months and just relax, brother. You've had like the amount of I remember what I forgot when you talked about trauma. Like everybody who's like, oh man, this is such a relief for Rittenhouse. It's like, but it's also like you realize watching the acquittal and the moment of acquittal when he just collapses into his chair, like and like the amount of trauma that's been inflicted on him just through the process. I was nervous. I remember, and I think we were all talking about this on the Ricky Edda stream, like how nervous I was when the verdict was about to be announced. Like for him, like you're just like, how, can we avoid this massive injustice that could just happen if things go wrong?
Right.
So yeah, I don't mean it's not a victory. It sets a societal precedent. If anything, it's just another thing pushing the societal precedent away from self-defense. A guilty verdict would have obviously cemented that, but even the fact that he was prosecuted in this case with such obvious, self-defense evidence out there, really itself weakens the right of self-defense, because, if you're just going to get prosecuted and that's the end of that, like that's punishment enough.
Yeah.
I may have just gotten inspiration for today's vlog, but the prosecution in this case, I keep forgetting the word, but trying to get people to perjure themselves. Suborning perjury. Yes. I keep saying sojourning. Suborning perjury, not disclosing and not communicating potentially exculpatory information. The prosecution in this case played as dirty as the DA or the circuit attorney in McCloskey's, where they disassembled that non-functional gun to make it functional so they could press the proper charges that they needed to press. This should have revealed the prosecutorial misconduct and hopefully should be something of a red pill even to those who thought Kyle was guilty in the first place. A red pill for the prosecution, a red pill for the media lies. And yeah, it wasn't good for self-defense, but I think the awakening that it's going to have brought about in people now who realize they have been lied to for 14 straight months, that should be hopefully the good red pill of this entire situation. But both prosecutors tampered with evidence in both of these prosecutions.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's take a look at this super chat. I saw a post on social media whereby someone was comparing Kyle's acquittal with Zimmerman's Florida 95, making it seem like Kyle was some vigilante killer. Does the First Amendment trump people spewing false information?
So
2 questions there, but yeah.
Yeah. So let's bifurcate out the Zimmerman one and just nail that, because that's what he's at. And I'm a Florida bar attorney. The Florida law is completely different than Wisconsin law, right? So they're dealing with two different sorts of laws, right, that are applicable here. And the facts were much different. And look, I've said this on multiple streams, but with Zimmerman, I think it's one that, at least for me, and I think most people, didn't leave a good taste in your mouth. But when you look at the law and you actually look at the application of the law, Zimmerman was justified under Florida law, right? So like under Florida law, that was justified shoot. However, right, the facts are just so different. They're just so different, right? I mean, in that case, Zimmerman could be viewed as pursuing Trayvon versus, vice versa, where it's clear. We have clear and very convincing evidence from all angles, all sorts of drones, that it was, in fact, Rosenbaum that was pursuing Rittenhouse, not the other way around. And to a certain extent, Huber and Grosskreutz as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Zimmerman case was interesting in that, like, we didn't have video of it, right? We had some physical evidence. The physical evidence we had seemed to point to self-defense, like the fact that, Mr. Zimmerman had like cuts and scrapes on the back of his head that suggested he had been tackled to the ground, and that supported his story of self-defense. But people were, I remember being really angry about that case because, at the time that I thought like, I wasn't, I didn't have some strong belief like, oh, Zimmerman is clearly innocent, clearly didn't do anything wrong, but more like, it's clear that the prosecution can't disprove self-defense here, right? And so, as a lawyer who's like, okay, well, that's the burden in Florida, you have to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. Clearly, just if you believe in legal process, this guy should not be convicted. Even if he's not like innocent in like the grand scheme of things. This case is totally different. It's like Kyle is just innocent. Like it was clearly self-defense. There's video evidence of it. There's no question about it. Should never have even been thought of being prosecuted, and yet it still was. So that's, I think it's Kyle is much more of a victim of an unjust prosecution than Zimmerman in that respect, from an objective sense. And then the second question you had is like, is the First Amendment protect spewing false information? Yeah, it does. You can lie. Like First Amendment allows you to lie. Now, if you lie in a way that causes damage, you risk defamation claims. But as we've talked about before, defamation is so weak in the United States that that's not much of a remedy.
And I would say only with the Zimmerman case. Now, I know what I thought at the time. And now, having seen the way the media systematically lies both before, during, and after the trial, I have now had a more open mind as to maybe I was wrong in my preconceived notions based on what the media was reporting of the Zimmerman case.
Sure.
And one concrete example is, yeah, I did recall being told that Zimmerman was told by the first responder, whoever they called on the phone, do not get out of the car. And apparently that is simply not what was said to Zimmerman on the phone. Whether or not that changes anything about this, the outcome of the trial is a separate issue. The fact that we were led to believe that that was a fact when it was factually incorrect is cause for question as to what other lies we were told about that case that might cause people who had one idea of that case to reconsider, especially if they had followed it as closely as we followed the Rittenhouse.
But see, here's the difference, Viva. Back then, it was just a spin, right? Every periodical had a spin. Now it is outright gaslighting. I mean, outright giving you something and convincing you of a false narrative. We've ramped it up to 2,000 since the Zimmerman case.
Right, there's no question. I guess it's more evident, and in this case we had more evidence to disprove the lies. In Zimmerman, I think maybe you had less evidence to actually disprove lies, but knowing the way they've lied, I would go back and view everything differently. But the world was not watching the Zimmerman case with the same scrutiny as Rittenhouse. So I don't think people got the same, spoonful of deceit from the media that we saw in this case. But I have no reason now to deny that it existed in the similar proportions during the Zimmerman incident, leading up to the trial, during the trial, and afterwards.
Yeah,
Well, Viva,
it definitely has made me double think every single time I read something on the news now. Before there were obviously, times when you come across something and you're like, I don't know that I believe that, or if you know a little bit better and you're like, well, that's kind of being twisted in a little bit of a manipulative way. But like after the experience of this trial, it has really ingrained in me, like every single thing that I read, I need to question it, which is just, it's so unfortunate because that's just exhausting. Right. So, Will, by the way, how are you on time? Are you?
I can stick around for like 15 more minutes and then I got to get going.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure. Here's another super chat. Have you guys spoken about the
We just
Wisconsin
mentioned
Christmas
it.
parade?
We just mentioned it about the guy who was let out on bail. There's possible animus. I mean, in fact, I got to look more into it because I don't feel comfortable speaking too much on stuff. But yeah, definitely something that is notable. And once again, shows how a car can be a deadly weapon. This is actually material in the Arbery case where, one of the charges, they were assaulting them with the vehicles, right?
Right.
And frankly, I've said this even, you see Europe. I was actually in Europe, in Paris when there was a truck attack, right? A car, a vehicle can certainly be a deadly weapon.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I just had to give it to Fox this morning. I mean, it's not the first time when the media reports on these types of seemingly political inconvenient atrocities. They switch to very passive terminology. A car struck, casualties occurred. They said fatalities occurred. And it turns my stomach because if it had been anything else, I think we're far enough out from the incident that we can actually start to piece together some evidence, and we could probably say that this was intentional. The fact that they use passive terminology that dissociates human agency from this, it's what they do in other incidents where they want to protect the accused by dissociating an individual from the incident. It just happened. Fatalities occurred, not that a man deliberately drove his truck through a crowd. And then if some people say, well, he might have been drunk, he might have been a lot of things. You can raise those on defense. But right now, what we know is that someone drove their truck through. It didn't just happen. It was caused, and someone did it.
Yeah,
Right.
and a lot of those details are still developing and whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see when more information comes out on that to see what else we can pick apart from it, right?
Yeah, and I got one little quick thing though. I mean, to Viva's point, and this just strengthens it, is that the media has a built-in incentive to catastrophize everything. So if they are not catastrophizing something, you have to wonder why. Ask yourself why, right? Why are they not catastrophizing something that normally they would do?
That's true. That's
For
a good
clicks.
point.
Yeah.
So here's a question. Will, what do you think? Would Kyle have been convicted if video evidence were not available? What's your opinion?
Ooh, tricky. I mean, you have to assume all the similar witnesses are in the same place. McGinnis being the best witness there in terms of being like somebody who was running right behind it. Although whether they could prove that, it's tricky, but I don't know. I think he probably still ultimately gets acquitted. I think because there's eyewitness testimony that probably, and the best eyewitness testimony would still support Rittenhouse. There's also physical evidence. Like you remove the video evidence, but you still have the stippling or whatever on Rosenbaum's hand, and the bruising to Kyle, the skateboard, you probably have more examination of the gun. I think there's probably still an acquittal based on the physical evidence and the eyewitness testimony, but it's definitely a lot harder. I think the video evidence made it a slam dunk, whereas it's a much more open question in a world.
Although at the same time, I think that sorry, I started to cut you off there. I know, especially right after that super chat.
I was going to cut Will off as a joke.
And this one pissed me off, by the way. I mean, because I was like, we definitely addressed this. Like, I mean, like maybe they weren't listening, but like we all have said,
literally just say that. Like I basically just said
every single freaking one of us.
What Theophrastus means is that you're not believing it. I know Theophrastus. I've seen him on. He means this is the truth, and we're sort of just passing it off as a possibility.
We're not passionate enough about it. I mean, yes, it's a big fucking deal. Like, sorry, person who as much, but it's a big deal.
We went into like the prosecution is itself the punishment. It sucks to go through all this stuff. It's going to deter people from using self-defense so that leftist writers can do that. I'm almost certain I said something verbatim to that half an hour ago.
Dude,
I'll say with respect to Rittenhouse, if they didn't have the video evidence and the photograph of Grosskreutz with the gun in his hand, I think he would have been convicted.
On that one, that's an interesting question.
So if they did not have that particular photograph, then it would have been a disputed fact as to where that gun was. Was it even in his hand? Pointed at Kyle. They would not have been able to get that, what I think was the catastrophic ending of the trial admission out of Grosskreutz. So I think no video evidence, he would have been convicted. And I think it's the irony. Who said this? That it's not Big Brother. That's it's not the government that's surveying us all the time. It's actual other content creators. But those vloggers that night did in fact save Kyle Rittenhouse's life.
Yep.
They certainly did a mitzvah, and I think that they, that's something they should be applauded for.
Yep.
Right. So a lot of this about, obviously the media's role in this, so Will, obviously you do a lot of work through Human Events, reporting on current events and whatnot. So how do you see, I guess, kind of like your role through all of this, and sort of like the role that a publication like Human Events will play going forward?
So, I mean, like the way, we're working on sort of internally getting Human Events to, the point of like, we want to be the rigor, beauty, quality in terms of the quality of the articles and then in the news. And then the role is, I mean, like we don't have a national review for the populist side, or we haven't. Like, I think the closest thing now is maybe Claremont and American Mind, what they're doing. But there's a role for that. Like, you want to be the kind of central place where, people talk about these things. And rather, like, you want the polish of a national review without the, for lack of a better word, cuckiness of national review, right? Like
I like it.
The general, like, the fact that they publish such nasty stuff about like the Covington kids early on, like somebody that just takes a hard line, but does it. And I think that's part of it, but also it's just, I also think about like what I do personally, and it's similar to what you all do, which is we translate, right? We take legal jargon and legal proceedings that are incomprehensible to a layperson or very difficult to comprehend, and we make them understandable, because that's an important role, I think. And I think the fact that the Ricchietta stream and all you guys have been killing it, that's a product of the fact that there's a huge demand out there for good, like, legal analysis that isn't tainted by corporate press.
Absolutely.
Alita, can you bring up the Omnissiah Sphinx chat? If the judge didn't have his thumb on the scale and worked to let him off, Rittenhouse would have been found guilty.
He did have
that judge was not at all in the tank for Rittenhouse, like that, especially towards the end.
This is where confirmation bias is a hell of a thing, because at the beginning, I didn't think he was on Rittenhouse's side at all. I just thought he was being reasonably objective. Towards the end, I started thinking that the public pressure was getting to him to the point where he was not. He's the judge. He's not out there to look out for interest, but where he was being lenient to the side of the prosecution, where I don't think he should have been. So I not deny, but I disagree with the premise of this question.
Yeah,
and even looking into the McMichaels, I don't think the judge has it out for the McMichaels. I think it's just the facts of the case that lend to it, and so it's not a question of judicial bias.
Yeah,
but Viva, he had a patriotic ringtone in that American flag Kleenex box, so he obviously was far right.
Like, if the defense was misbehaving, then the judge would have lectured the defense too. The judge is a former prosecutor. He said as much during the trial, right? Judges who are former prosecutors generally have a pro-prosecutor bias, not unheard of. Like, you're just mad that your guy was misbehaving to try and make a case out of nothing. And the judge called him on it and wasn't going to let him violate Rittenhouse's Fifth Amendment rights, which no judge would.
I think if the judge were in the pocket or even leaning to the side of Rittenhouse, he would have sanctioned Binger. I mean, he had all the he had the
100%.
he had the ammunition necessary to sanction Binger, but how? On his own. What's it called? On his own accord is
Sua sponte.
Sua sponte. I mean, he had the power. If sua sponte sanctions is within the purview of the judge, which I think it is, because they have all the power in the world.
Yes. After he said bad faith, that was pretty big.
Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, though, it was better for Kyle, for the jury to return a verdict, right? Because it's like, that is the most it's like, I want to say like grassroots way that he could come out of it, right? It's a jury of his peers. It's not some judge who kind of swooped in and kind of decided to just take control, take it away from a jury, like, as we all would expect to make a decision. And so I think that it's one of those things, the most that people can say about this decision is, well, like it was presented to them poorly or something, or like, oh, they misunderstood the facts or something.
Only Maria Shriver could say something like that. But what do you mean? It was an organic justice and not a dismissal on a technicality.
Yeah, speaking of Maria Shriver, I think that's probably what you're referring to, right?
Yeah,
right,
I'm trying to take a beat to digest the written. You can't digest that which you have not yet eaten, Maria Shriver. You didn't eat the facts of this case to digest anything. Should have said that, actually. That would have been
and it's even like saying,
I hate to disrupt you guys, but I got to get off the. Sorry, I have to get off the.
Alrighty, yeah. Thanks so much for being here.
Talking with you, Will.
Absolutely.
This has been wonderful. I would love to have you on sometime to talk more about Section 230 and all of that good work that you're doing over there. I think that would be a fantastic stream if you would be willing to come back.
100%.
But this has been lovely, and thank you so much for being here, and have a great Thanksgiving with your family.
And thanks, guys. Thanks, Viva. Thanks,
nice to see you again.
Appreciate
it.
Yeah.
Peace out.
Peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't digest it. How about you go watch the freaking trial? Half of these people have not seen 10 minutes of it.
And Viva, even her statement, she said not charged. It's like, well, they were charged. They were just proven proven invalid in court, right?
That was one of my responses to her directly. I said they were charged. They had 2 weeks of evidence, and they heard. And then I mentioned some of the Grosskreutz admissions. But man, I'll tell you one thing: Mark Ruffalo using JoJo, referring to him by his nickname, and someone made the response like, you know where else he had used that nickname JoJo before, and it's like it's beyond. It's
Hollywood, they only there can you defend people like Rosenbaum.
Did you guys see Amber M. Ruffin's 2-minute opening monologue?
No.
Oh, you see, I would say bring it up, but don't bring it up because that network would be dirty enough to give you a copy strike.
Yeah.
Everyone go find it. It's on her Twitter feed. A 2-minute monologue, and you want to see what acting is and what fake tears are. It's stomach turning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't watch this. People say we should do like we as a group should do like a reaction to some people talking about it, but I can't even do it because it's too cringe for me. Like literally I watch it and I just, after 30 seconds, I just am so, cringed out. I can't deal with it.
Well, it's cringe in bad faith because I have no doubt they would weaponize the copyright system to strike a channel that is critical of their on the basis of copyright abuse or copyright
without a doubt.
Right.
Without a doubt.
So Manny Fabiani, I'm really sorry that I saw this just after Will left, but maybe we can answer this for him, or maybe give our thoughts instead. What are your thoughts on the effect of populism on America's role in terms of international institutions and global commons? Can we take care of our own and police the world simultaneously? That is a very... I like that a lot, though. That is a very good question. I really wish that I had seen this before he left, because I would love to see his answer.
I'll field Will's answer. Will's answer would have been, there's far too much populism. I have no idea what his answer would have been. But in Canada, I can tell you that this is, you call it populism and then they call it nationalism as though it's a bad thing to say, back off the international stage, Justin Trudeau, quit giving billions of dollars to foreign aid, quit worrying about your presence on the international scene, quit worrying about crippling the Canadian economy to the benefit of the UN and to China. I think that's what they mean by the populism, is that get back to looking after your own people first and then worry about policing the world, except where policing the world is necessary to protect your own people. I think in the US it's gone from doing that to actually using that as the pretext for foreign intervention for economic and military reasons, not actual protection.
Right. So next, hey now. No, this is great. I love having conversation that sort of rolls between people. Let's see. Okay, here's another super chat. I don't think a jury verdict is any better for Kyle than a judge dismissal would have been. His enemies will find any reason to oppose him. We're seeing it play out in the left-wing media right now.
Well, I'll tell you, my opinion, it's better this way because now you have to say that there were 12 racist individuals and not just one racist judge, if that's what you want to do, or 12 biased individuals, 12 ignorant morons, as opposed to just one activist judge. I think this was the best outcome once the injustice had already been carried out for the last 14 months, followed to trial.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, another question that I had gotten, or that I had seen people asking about, was about the possibility of federal charges against Kyle Rittenhouse. I don't see those being terribly likely. I don't know about you guys.
There were articles about whether it's possible, whether it could happen. I haven't seen it, in terms of charges that have actually come down the pipe or anything that's concrete. I don't think it's likely, and frankly, at this point, I don't think they've got the stomach to take 2 L's. So I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah,
and
also it's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Via.
No, I can't pass this off as my knowledge, but Barnes, and we talked about it last night, said virtually no chance. Apparently, the FBI or the feds have already investigated and effectively give the clearance that no federal laws were broken. So Barnes seems to think it's a virtually nil. The civil suits are a little bit more of a question mark, but on the feds going after them, feds going after Rittenhouse, most accounts are that he's already been investigated and already been cleared, so there's no grounds.
Yeah, that's likely. I mean, and also to be clear that for the most part, any kind of a murder charge is, generally speaking, a state crime that is litigated in state criminal courts. It's only under specific circumstances, usually, that somebody will be charged. Oh, charged. Excuse me. I don't know where that accent came out.
There you go.
Charged.
Havoc.
listen to too much havoc.
Havoc over there.
So no, but somebody's only going to be charged, under specific circumstances. Like, for example, if it was a killing of a federal judge or a federal agent, or there's some ship is in engaged in interstate commerce or something like that. Like those are usually going to be some.
Or if they were federal employees. I mean, if the perpetrator had some federal connection, which Rittenhouse doesn't. If they were cops, or if they were whatever, which Rittenhouse doesn't. So, yeah, that's the consensus, it seems.
Yeah, for sure. So, anywho, well, this has been wonderful. I don't know if you guys you guys have been watching the Ahmaud Arbery closing arguments too? How did those go?
I've been watching it. I understand the other arguments. I just, at this point, have seen enough evidence to know that my opinion's not going to change. And I find it frustrating to hear this. Yeah, Ahmaud reached for his gun and therefore was armed, and therefore it's similar to Rittenhouse. It's like, yeah, but no, because the McMichaels are the ones chasing Arbery for 5 minutes and not vice versa. So I had my inclinations at the beginning. They have been reaffirmed by what I have seen by the evidence, and I think it's I think they're done. And it's a terrible situation because they might have in their own heads thought they were doing something, good, justice, protecting the neighborhood. It escalated as things do when this happens, and now 6 lives are ruined. The lives of Ahmaud's family, Ahmaud, the McMichaels, all because burglary. And people accuse me of being a sissy. Oh, you're just going to let people take your stuff. Property, even if he were taking property, which he wasn't the day of, good. Lives are ruined over property. So,
yeah, I said this on Nate's stream, and I'll say it for the benefit of your audience, Alita. But I think that if you take this out of a political hat and you stop getting behind, okay, we got to get self-defense, and every self-defense trial we got to win. And you think about it in reverse. What if the situation had been flipped? What had been leftist rioters? What this terrorist, coming after somebody who was of a different political persuasion, maybe a conservative, chasing them down and gunning them down? Would that be something you'd want to defend, right? Exact same circumstances, or, very similar circumstances? No, you wouldn't. And look, just because Ahmaud Arbery may not have been a good guy, he may have not have had good intention, he may have been there with bad intention, he may have been a bad guy, who was high when he was there, on drugs, out on felony probation. All of that doesn't change what the law is and the application of the law. And the application of the law is that Travis Michael should be guilty in this case, right?
What's frustrating is also, JM says they did not chase Arbery. Yes, they did. I mean, this is where if we can't agree on the facts, they chased Arbery for, I don't know if it was 5 or 10 minutes, but they chased him. They admit that they chased him. They recognized it. He was hauling ass. They suspect him of burglary. They chased him in a pickup truck. They followed him down the street. The father went around another. I mean, they did. So if we can't agree on the facts, then obviously we'll come to different conclusions. But I think we can go for it.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that, like, I get why people are, he's terrorizing the neighborhood and you don't want to support, the destruction of property, people coming and terrorizing neighborhoods, especially as, and I think someone mentioned this before, is that as police pull back, people are concerned. I think rightfully so. When the police pull back, what's going to happen to their property? What's going to happen to their homes? I think that is something that people do need to think about. But the answer is not under the law. The answer is not under the law to go out and chase people down and, end up engaging them with a firearm, right? That's not something that our laws support. And that's not something that we want to support as a country just because of the precedent it would set.
Right.
If you could you bring up Legion of Myth? It looks like a flame in the avatar.
Okay, let's see.
And it says, my stuff is more important than your life. I presume I work hard for my stuff. I don't work for you at all. And Legion of Myth, this is what I want to, this is my point in all this. Okay, I appreciate that belief. And I do appreciate that if you're breaking into people's houses or, burglars, you run the risk of very bad outcomes. But is your property worth more than your life? Because right now the McMichaels' lives are ruined over property. So it's not just Arbery that's dead. Is it your life worth being in jail because you wanted to protect a toolbox and it ended up in someone getting killed and your life is ruined now? So it's not just about the life of the thief. It's about your own life.
True. And let's be very clear about this too. This changes nothing about a lot of the doctrines which most people would be applying, right? In a situation in which, let's say, people are terrorizing your neighborhood and you're defending your property. There's castle doctrine, right? If someone's coming onto your property, right, and they're invading your property, you have no duty to retreat under, especially in Georgia, right? They have castle doctrine, right? So if someone was invading a property, that's not what we have here. Right. So let's be very clear. The facts matter, guys. Facts do matter. And there's a lot of facts in the Arbery case, if you haven't been paying attention to it, that are absolutely material in the application of the law.
Like this one right here. Exactly. I'll leave it go for it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact is they chased Arbery. They admitted that we had him tracked like a rat. And that's one of the biggest frustrations with what we were talking about earlier with the blue check mafia, right? With people kind of running away without knowing the facts. And if on the one hand, in the case of Rittenhouse, you are getting upset about people running away without knowing the facts and formulating all of these opinions that are based on incorrect information. If you have that frustration, you want to also be careful about making opinions formulated on information if you are not sure that it's correct. So the information about whether or not they chased Arbery, that's very important to know in order to formulate that kind of an opinion. So we, it's just a friendly reminder for everyone and that's discussing any of these cases. And
a reminder to everybody who calls us biased. I mean, we are very fairly applying this law. If we wanted to be totally biased and be like, all right, let's just take a super pro self-defense stance on here, we would, but we're being intellectually honest with you guys. And some people are uncomfortable with it. Some people don't like it, but that's the whole point. We're going to give it to you accurately under the law, unlike other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I will be open enough to say, like, when I think I have something of a preconceived notion that is unlikely to change, but for extremely compelling evidence. I mean, in the Ahmaud Arbery case, from the very beginning, I said this is not the way things should happen. Period. In Rittenhouse, in the beginning, I said shouldn't have been doing this either. Like, he shouldn't have been there, but that doesn't mean that he then should relinquish his life to the mob. But then facts came out in Rittenhouse that made me question, like, okay, well, now I'm going to rethink that he shouldn't have been there argument, because a lot of people were there. And if they shouldn't have been there, seeing the authorities not tell them they shouldn't be there changes my opinion. Learning the more facts in Ahmaud Arbery. Yeah. Okay. So they thought he was burglarizing 11 days ago. That does not allow for citizen's arrest the day of under the law. And if they're going to go for jury nullification, interesting, but it's a bold strategy. I don't think at this point it's going to work, but
right. Well, here's an interesting question, and maybe this will be a good last one before we sign out. Having all you lawyers from different places and the exchange of ideas, does it affect how you view law and legal frameworks and pre-existing notions of what is common law? I think absolutely. I loved, like, that was one of my favorite parts about the Rekieta Law Stream of Wonder, was the fact that we had people from all kinds of different backgrounds and different, experiences that were coming together and sort of giving their different inputs from their professional experience. For example, I loved, I said it before and I'll say it again. I loved having Emily D. Baker on there as a 10-year prosecutor on that kind of a case. That's so valuable to have that kind of information for somebody that has said like, yeah, I have tried probably hundreds of cases. And so I definitely understand this experience, and I can give you real information from it, not just theoretical, not just, case law research along those lines. But I mean, but everyone that was involved in that case, or involved in that live stream, I was so thankful for all of the input that everyone gave, because it really added to the whole discussion.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
No, go ahead.
No, you go for it.
Okay, what I was going to say is just, I mean, exactly what Alita said. This is why we do this, is because we have different perspectives. We're coming from different places. Even listening to Viva and hearing like his Canadian perspective and his Canadianisms, it's like, well, you guys have a constitution, so, that's really nice. But taking that in, you can make improvements. And look, I'm the first to say American law is not perfect, right, guys? Our laws that are on the books right now, they're not all perfect. Some of them do need to be changed, right? There's laws that absolutely need to be changed. And one thing we've seen, especially as different parties come into power, like we saw with Thomas Binger, right? A lot of the laws that when we were on the tough on crime, the zero tolerance, era, they, and Republican DAs were in place, right? People were happy about it. Those rhinos were super happy about the power of the prosecutor. Now, when it's these leftist Marxists in power, we're a little bit concerned about it, right? We're seeing it go the other way. Also, same thing with OSHA, presidential mandates. We're seeing, hey, when Biden's in office, these are pretty scary. We want to make sure these are clawed back, right? Versus we might have been defending these when Trump was in office. So I think you can see how these things can be used in a bad way.
Darth Crypto, by the way, is on a mission, a tear against Binger.
Yes.
So yeah, but
so he requested that. I believe this is the tweet that he's referring to. He asked for me to show this, so we can definitely talk about it. He said there are many legal practitioners who are dismayed by the unethical behavior by the Kenosha, Wisconsin District Attorney's Office, including and especially ADAs Binger and Krause, who just tried Kyle Rittenhouse. I've obtained one formal complaint to the Wisconsin Office of Lawyer Regulation. Shall we read through it?
It doesn't seem too long.
Yeah, I think it's a little long, but I guess we can maybe go through like the first paragraph. How about that?
Yeah.
And then we can direct everyone to, I will link in the description below. I'll link to this tweet. How about that?
Darth Crypto is doing some good investigative work. Darth Crypto is what journalists used to be.
Yes.
Darth Crypto, and who was the other one that I loved what he was doing? Oh, geez, I can't remember the name.
And now we have to do it, right? This is the point, guys. But this is why we have communities. This is why you should all follow all of us, engage with all of us, and talk with us, give us information. Because look, I don't know about you guys, but I've been given so much information. It's taking me more time. I've had to dedicate way more time just to filtering through all the information I've got, people reaching out. We are doing the work of journalists because they are too dishonest to do it, right?
Right.
I consider myself an analyst, not a journalist.
Well,
No,
I can't blame you, Viva.
Let me just read the first paragraph real quick. So Gage testified under oath, however, that his CCW license was expired on August 25th, 2020. In the screenshot of his CCW, which may not be genuine as an expiration date of 1/10/2023. This may be forgery, that something is blacked out. Genuine. It seems like he lied under oath. It would seem that his CCW was not expired, but suspended or revoked. As you know, there is a huge difference between a license of any type being expired or suspended/revoked. There absolutely is a huge difference.
No, and that goes to the testimony that Binger, that was not just provided by Grosskreutz, but that Binger solicited, that basically sort of got from, said he suggested, he used the word expired in his question, from what I remember. I may be wrong, and I hope I'm not. I think Binger used the word expired in his question, which, if he didn't know, it's a weird word to use. If he did know, it is soliciting untruthful testimony from a witness, which is unethical. So,
right. So here's, I guess, one last question: should Georgia citizens' arrest laws be abolished? Well, they already have
already abolished, but
they were repealed last May. But most states actually do have them. Most, if not all, other states actually have them.
Either have them in the common law or have them in the statutes. Because you got to understand, even so, this whole narrative about Georgia, and Kurt brings this up from Uncivil Law. They bring up, okay, this was codified. It was codified during the Civil War, right? But it's been common law since, European days, right? The British era days, right? And I'm not sure whether the fact that they overturned the statute necessarily invalidates the common law in Georgia. I'm not sure how that
That's
would
a good point.
work. So it may still be on the books in terms of common law.
My
Okay.
understanding is that even if the Georgia law were still in effect, that they did not comply with the provisions of that law, in that they did not have probable cause, within the contemporaneous events in order to effect a citizen's arrest anyhow. So that's my understanding, but I might be wrong.
Okay. Yeah. So okay. This is very last super chat. No one sent any more. So I'll let you guys end up with this one.
Ask and answer,
Kyle case,
people.
mostly an attack on the Second Amendment.
Yes, we all agree with this, I think.
And I was just going to say on the panel question, I mean, having a panel to get the perspectives is amazing. I come from a family, 5 kids, 4 of whom are lawyers. I think 3 of us are married to lawyers. So, 4 lawyers. My dad's a lawyer. So we've got lawyers in Ontario, Quebec, New York, California, Florida with extended family. So this is a Christmas dinner when we have a bunch of lawyers at a table arguing. So I'm used to it, but it's phenomenal to get people's perspective, because we all do have our different leanings, our different perspectives that bring a complete or more complete understanding to these scenarios.
Oh, geez, guys, come on. Why do you do this to me?
All right.
All right. That's all.
I have a second dog to walk in the paralyzed one.
Challenge accepted.
All right. That's all. So, all right. Thanks everyone for joining in. Thank you to Legal Mindset and Viva Fry. And thank you also especially to our guest earlier, Will Chamberlain. I'm so thrilled that he was willing to come on and talk to us. So I'm really hoping that I can get him again to talk about Section 230 and all the tech stuff, because I love talking about that. Anyway, with that, if you guys enjoyed it, like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Support us on Locals, Patreon, YouTube memberships. You can buy merch. Buy merch for somebody for Christmas. Why not? Who wouldn't want a Legalbytes logo on a sweatshirt? And with that, make sure to also find Legal Mindset and Viva Fry and Robert Barnes on vivabarneslaw.locals.com and Legal Mindset at legalmindset.locals.com.
Yes, you got it.
All righty. And otherwise, I have their YouTube channels linked in the description below as well. So if you're not subscribed to them, I can't imagine why you wouldn't be. All right. With that, I'll see you guys in the next video.